Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming to the, I had to check here, starting to lose track of time at this point of Summit and Ansible Fest. My name is Tim Atnall. I'm a senior product manager with the Ansible team. Been working with Ansible now almost 11 years, so I'm kind of the jack of all trades here. As a product manager, one of the areas that I work with, it's the content creator tools team. Joining me is Brad Thornton. He's a senior software engineer and the architect of our creator tools. A lot of the things we'll see here, he's overseen, and some of it he's actually written himself. So we have no one more authoritative than Brad here. You're probably going to want to hear from him more, so we'll get to him. Just let me get through some things. In this talk, we're going to cover a quick brief history of the development with Ansible to set some context of where we started and where we're going. Then we're going to get to some demos. Brad's going to show you a bunch of the tools that exist today and how to use them. Just briefly, give you an idea of what's out there if you're not familiar with them, see what you can do with them, why we've created them. Then we're going to take a little bit of time to talk about the road forward, what we're thinking, where we're heading with creator tools inside of Ansible in the next year or two. And then we're going to have some more demos. Brad will come up here and show you some of the things that he and his team have been working on, and you know, early stages, a lot of it, but I think it has a lot of promise and give you an idea of where we're going. And also, if you have feedback for us and want to try things out, go at it. So with that, I'm going to start on a brief history of development with Ansible. In the beginning, when Ansible was first created as a project by Michael DeHaan in February 2012, he started with the idea of that Ansible was a batteries included distribution. There was no package manager, and all the modules and the plugins, the content, was part of the core engine itself. It all shipped. You just did, py install Ansible. You had it all. And a new version would come out, you would just run that command again, you get the latest version, and all the modules and everything in it were updated. So this was good. It made things very easy to install, very easy to get started and run. But then we had a problem. We became a victim of our own success in a way. Somewhere around 2017, starting to go into 2018, it became apparent we had a problem. And like I said, a lot of it came from our success, so good problem to have. But that was that the number of modules and plugins and use cases for Ansible were growing just exponentially. By this point, we were up to, I think, 4,000 modules, somewhere in around that neighborhood. Between 3 and 4, yeah. And at the growth rate we were looking at like 8,000 to 10,000 in the next 18 months. So we realized this is the batteries included distribution. While it was great and it served its purpose and did really well for us and simplified the ability to get started with Ansible, was no longer going to continue working. So we needed to do something different, and that's what led to us envisioning collections. And I'll talk about those in a little bit. So somewhere around 2018, we conceived the idea of collections, and I remember it was at Ansible Fest 2018 that we first unveiled them and started showing them to people what they were conceptually. Then in 2019, we released Ansible 2.9. That was the first version that you could use collections with, but we had not separated the content from the core at that point, but you had the ability to at least try out collections, and we were working through all the issues there, documentation, getting people used to it, all the bugs and all that goodness. The first version where we had removed all the content and went strictly to collections was 2.10. That one was a bit experimental. If you're an AAP, or I guess it was Tower at the time, subscriber, we didn't support this version because we were still still working out the kinks that we didn't want to say use this in production yet. So 2.10 was out to the community, able to be used, but again, still a little experimental, but now all that content had been removed into its own collections, its own repositories. 2.11 then was the first version that we said, production ready, start using collections. And then, so we've continued on with the Ansible core with that direction, that there's a very limited amount of modules and plugins, very, very essential ones, and then everything else comes from collections. We did create a community release that simulated that batteries included type of distribution. There's a whole process for getting things included and whatnot, and there's a ton of modules and plugins just like the old distributions, but it's not every single thing that is out there. Some other quick things that happen that are essential to what we're talking about is we had the release of the Ansible Platform 2.0, or AAP2, as we call it. This was re-architected for greater scale and flexibility and introduced something called execution environments, or containerized Ansible runtimes that could be deployed and run in different ways and shapes and forms. It was very important to being able to scale for some of our biggest customers doing huge amounts of work across very complex network topologies. February 2022 was our 10-year anniversary. The Ansible project became 10. And then throughout last year, we've done a lot of continuous improvement. Some of it we've been talking about here at Ansible Fest and Summit. The automation mesh hasn't got a lot of talk here, but it's this network overlay for using execution environments and running it all over and at the closest points of your data centers or the targets. Event-driven automation, we've heard a lot about things like validated content, the ability to just have stuff in collections that you can have and run and use in your playbooks, digital signing, and then a lot of running Ansible on cloud. Oh, and then how can I forget Ansible Lightspeed? Everyone's been talking about it. It was formerly called Wisdom, so if everyone's wondering what happened to Wisdom, it's now called Lightspeed. So marketing, I don't know, I'm a product manager, not marketing. All right, so who's familiar with collections? Okay, it's a decent amount. So we're still going to go over them for all the people that didn't raise their hand. And if you didn't know collections, didn't raise your hand, well, now you're going to have to suffer. Really quick, collections are just was a new packaging format that we added, the ability to have your content external to the core itself and to have it in a way that you could bundle it and distribute it and make releases with modules, plugins, roles, some playbooks, the docs, the tests. We're adding rule books so that the event-driven automation, you could have some of those, or source plugins will be in there. So it's the ability to move all this Ansible content around and use it with the core. So as I was alluding to, in the beginning, in the early days, for example, like Ansible 2.7, the way things worked under batteries included is we'd make a release, and then there'd be 4 or 6 months of all sorts of bugs and improvements and modules getting proposed and merged. And then there would be this frenzy right before a new release was coming out of everyone trying to get their stuff in and people trying to review pull requests. And then a new version of Ansible would come out with all these new changes and all these new bug fixes. And if you missed that, well, you're going to be waiting another 4 to 6 months for your new feature to go out the door. We still would work in some bug fixes in between that. But it then meant that if the following day AWS released a new service, you were going to be waiting 4 to 6 months until we could release the module in order to let you automate that new service. So this became a problem in the ability to release quickly, given that we now had thousands of modules and hundreds of different vendors that went from networking to security to cloud to Linux servers to Windows servers and whatnot. So what Ansible content collections allowed us to do is do feature releases asynchronously. So it was separated from the core. You would take all your collections and then you combine them and you'd have your own Ansible distribution, whether it was just for you, for your organization, or it was grabbing the latest community release. You now had that type of control and flexibility. It also gave us the flexibility that if a bug if there was a bug that you needed to get a release out, you could just do it. You could release that collection and say to the world, hey, we got a new version out. Everyone grab it. It's going to fix this problem, or it's going to add this new feature. So what happened with the release of collections is that the content creator is born. And that's what we're here to talk about. And this is the focus of the content tools team at Ansible and what our whole mission is about. So it now allowed for that you could have domain-specific content and content experts that could get together that that was independent of the Ansible core community. It's just a sub-community of the overall Ansible community and ecosystem. And it allowed for those bug fixes and new improvements to happen at the rate of that community and that group of experts. So all type of creators could now get involved in that particular area, that particular project that interests them, or they had an expertise or an itch, so to speak. And it made things a whole lot better. So now you had Ansible, you have the whole content creation improvements happen, the new collection gets released, people can install it right away, and you have a new improved Ansible. And that can just keep happening day after day if necessary, but hopefully not having to install a new version of Ansible every day. All right, so that was about collections. Another thing that we have out is execution environments. And the background on that is when dealing with the Ansible automation platform, AAP, we had customers that are running on tens of thousands, even some hundreds of thousands of devices, and they had multiple nodes running the controller, which used to be Tower, and they would have to manage all these virtual environments and deal with, do I have the right collections, excuse me, on each of the nodes that are working there? Do I have the right dependencies in there? Do I have the right runtime matched up with that content? And it was just a headache. We were hearing that from all of our largest customers doing some of the most sophisticated automation, said, okay, we need to do better. And that's what led to the re-architecture of AAP2 and something called execution environments. We often refer to these just as EEs. And this is a form of containerized Ansible that combines the collections, the dependencies, and a version of Ansible core on top of the Red Hat UBI. So it's one container. So it's a very specialized container with that Ansible runtime that then controller can use to deploy and run containers on different worker nodes and with different environments that you could have paired different versions of Ansible core or collection sets together. So it gave a whole lot more flexibility and much easier to manage all these different type of environments and to do it in a distributed and scalable way. Because before AAP1, when you needed to add capacity, you would essentially have to bring down your system, add the new node, bring the whole cluster back up. Now this allowed us to do a lot more dynamic scaling and scaling back of things because it was all just containerized. All right, so that was the background. I'm going to quick go through just a few of the things that Brad's going to show. I'm going to have Brad come here because, like I said, you probably want to hear from him more than me. But one of the things that came out of this was a tool that Brad created. It's called the ansible-navigator. What this was is it was a command line utility, but it's really a text-based UI that would allow you to do all the running and testing of Ansible, particularly made it very easy for working with these EEs. You could do it locally and then push all that up to the AAP. So you could develop your collections, develop your playbooks, see what they're going to do with the particular execution environment that you had, whether it was one that someone else had created or you had created, and then know that you're going to get that same result when you push it up to AAP and pair it with that same EE. So there's also a lot of other great features that Brad will show you. I shouldn't steal his thunder there. Another tool, this is another community success story. That ansible-lint was created by someone in our community, and then we adopted it, and Brad's team has done a ton of work on this here, but it's a command line tool for linting your playbooks and roles and content to make sure that it's consistent, it's following best practices and processes and flagging things that could be problematic in your code, and do it in a very automated way. And then another thing that's really been great, really recommend you check it out, especially if you're interested in Ansible Lightspeed, is the VSCode extension. There's a language server behind it, does all the syntax highlighting, live validation of your Ansible content. It has lint tied into it, it has auto-completion, all sorts of good things, and it also has the ability to connect to the sorry, I got to get used to this, the Lightspeed service, in order to get that where it's suggesting tasks based on the natural language names that you're giving it. So that was my, yep.
I guess I'm up.
That was my whirlwind tour, and we're going to bring it to Brad here.
Hello, everybody. Hello, hello? Nope, not working. All right. I want to follow up on one thing Tim said.
Oh, please. Now you can correct all the things I just got wrong.
Actually, I want to bring attention back to the slide you put on there about the content creator. That slide was actually one of the last slides we added, and I think it's probably one of the most important slides in this entire deck, because what we saw when we split out collections from Ansible, the Ansible repo proper, everything changed. And not just because the content was in someplace else. The number of collections flourished immediately after that. The number of developers contributing and building collections went through the roof. Discoverability for collections actually went down because they were all over the place. Using collections became a little bit harder because you had to bundle them into an execution environment, you had to solve them with Ansible Galaxy, and you had to go hunt them down. So the collection split and the invention of execution environments was done for all of the right reasons, but it introduced new problems that didn't exist, and those problems fall on the shoulders of the content creator, right? So all of the pain you felt when you couldn't just pip install Ansible anymore and you got everything in the world, that's like, we introduced those problems, it wasn't intentional. So it's part of the reason the DevTools team exists. And I'm just gonna jump into, oh, not your slides. A couple demos. Not the one I wanted. Hold on. Who's using the VSCode extension for Ansible today? Oh, good. And everybody was at the Ansible keynote yesterday. I'm going to actually spend a little less time on the extension because there were some great demos. The extension is actually another really good community success story. It was a gentleman named Thomas, I don't remember who he worked for, had actually developed the initial release of the extension on his own time. And the Red Hat DevTools team was starting to work on one. We saw his, and we were like, man, his is better than ours. We're like, so we reached out and basically changed the GitHub organization. We still co-develop. He still has full maintenance rights in the repo, still reviews PRs, credits at the bottom of the README. He's a great guy, so if you ever run into him, he gave us a great head start. Just a couple quick highlights on the extension. Tim mentioned ansible-lint. Let me bring up this other window here. Hold on. Ansible-lint is fully integrated to the extension, so you can, with every change in a playbook, on the save, come here. This should work. There we go, problem tab. So every time you save your document, ansible-lint runs in the background and will highlight and underline any issues in your playbook. And this, I think we're up to like 50 different rules in ansible-lint, and I think the production profile. Who's familiar with ansible-lint? Do you use it? Good. Ansible-lint has this concept of profiles. These were introduced just, I think, 6 months ago. The DevTools team was working with the Red Hat community of practice, and they asked us if we could codify more of the best practices for Ansible. We started writing those rules into ansible-lint, and we got a little bit of pushback from the community because we were adding 1 or 2 new ansible-lint rules a week. So it's like, this was okay last week, but it's not okay anymore, right? This is one of my favorite ones. We now insist that you capitalize the first letter of your task. I raised the issue for that one if you're curious. It's about the same time we kind of wrote the kind of the philosophy of ansible-lint. The goal is to kind of get back to the roots of Ansible. I mean, the very name playbook suggests that this is documentation. This is something you can actually read and understand what's happening. And I think we lost a little bit of that over time. So if you look at this simple playbook, was doing nothing more than cloning a repository, changing an interface on an Arista box, backing up the configuration and pushing the repo back to Git. You can read this, you can scan it real quick. You may not understand these modules, you may not be a network engineer, but you can easily understand exactly what's happening here, right? And a lot of this is because Ansible-lint, we're gonna get deeper into Ansible-lint in terms of rules in the future, but the goal of Ansible-lint is to really get us back to our roots of documentation. A couple of quick things to highlight here. Completion for every module. The language server is running in the background. We're parsing the documentation from all of the modules, building a huge index. It's context aware. I don't have a good example here, but if you're too deep into your attribute list, it'll actually suggest that. What else do I want to highlight here? And I think that's probably it for the extension. I'm going to spend a whole lot of time in the extension. But let's give this playbook a run. And we are going to run this playbook with Ansible-Navigator. Anybody using Ansible-Navigator? Oh, less people. Why? Somebody answer the question, why are you not using Ansible-Navigator? Huh? Haven't heard of it. Anybody? Okay.
That's what this talk is for.
Excellent. All right. Then actually, I'm going to take a step back. Okay. So Ansible-Navigator exists because, well, the trigger for Ansible-Navigator was because of the invention of execution environments. The Ansible playbook command won't work if all of your content in your playbook and your collections are inside a container, right? You could shell into the container. You could run the Ansible playbook command from that. But we wanted to give a better experience, I guess, to have a more kind of native feeling. So the easiest way for Ansible-Navigator to be used, hold on. Who forgets to do that? I should have had that one ready. Okay. So Ansible-Navigator has full parity with the Ansible playbook command. So everything you know about the Ansible playbook command, you can just do an Ansible-Navigator run. You'll notice I set the mode to standard out here, which basically tells Ansible-Navigator to run. I have a special callback plugin set for my task times, if you're wondering. Ansible-Navigator is going to run exactly like Ansible Playbook does. Any parameter you pass to Ansible Playbook, you can pass to Ansible-Navigator run. What's interesting about this one is it's actually this playbook ran inside an execution environment, but it looks exactly the same. So I actually had Podman fire up the container, Ansible runner inside, Ansible runner outside, runs the playbook inside the container. If you're curious and you're not kind of using execution environments, this may not work. I don't know if I have Ansible installed. EE false basically disables execution environment. Now it's using Ansible core out of my local virtual environment and all the collections I installed locally. So you can easily go from local development with a virtual environment, your choice of Ansible core version, collections on your local file system, build an execution environment, rerun your playbook, use the execution environment. So this is a really good kind of development step from, I have my local development environment set up, but I need to publish this code, this collection, this content, get it ready for production so you can use it in Ansible controller. This is the kind of the transition step. Run it all locally like you used to. Oh, what happened here? Paramico is not installed. Oh, awesome. That is, I wonder why it's doing that. Well, you'll see on the top one, this is a really good point. On the top one, I know when I build the execution environment, it has Ansible pylib.ssh in it. The bottom one is my local file system, my local version. So maybe I didn't even install Paramico or pylib.ssh at all. So, and I'm a networking person. That's a little embarrassing. All right. So Ansible-Navigator has, I talked about parity with Ansible Playbook. It also has parity with Ansible Inventory, Ansible Doc, Ansible config. We don't have ad hoc support, Ansible inventory. So most of if you look at the documentation, there's parity between Ansible-Navigator and all those individual Ansible command line utilities. The only difference is Ansible-Navigator will run those inside of the container, inside the execution environment for you. So most of the time, you don't actually even have to have Ansible core installed locally. You can build your execution environment, just run inside that. So that's mode standard out. Let's jump into the TUI, because I think this is where it gets real cool. Tim, you're keep an eye on the time for me, because I'm terrible about this.
I can more minutes.
Huh?
You got a couple more minutes, so we can.
Okay, because I could carry on for an hour.
Stuff.
So Ansible-Navigator, command line parity, mode standard out, also has a TUI, which is the text user interface. I'm going to jump into this. And this is my favorite part of Ansible-Navigator, because when you run a playbook, something goes wrong, you can't see all the data returned from all the tasks, you got to rerun it with -4 Vs, and you're trying to figure out what the heck's going on. Ansible-Navigator is kind of a drill down approach. You get your plays on the first page, on the second page you get your tasks. For each task, we actually keep the entire task payload So you can actually see everything returned and provided to that task. So you'll see here, this one actually cloned a repo. You can see the git command I ran. If I jump down to one of the other ones, and you can jump through, I'm hitting the number keys on my keyboard, so that was task 0. I can jump to task 1, I get the exact same information. I can jump to task 2, full payload, all the way over to task 4 and the completion. So that's pretty cool, right? No more digging around if you want to see exactly what was returned from the task. Maybe you didn't register it, we still actually track it here. Let's say this task failed, and you're like, man, I did something wrong on this. A little bit of context awareness here. I can type : doc. It's a little VI-like, so there's a colon prompt at the bottom, so you hit the colon key. But you type : doc at the bottom. It's going to take us right to the documentation for that plugin, for the task. So if it fails, you can immediately jump to the docs and look at the examples. And then you're here, you're looking at it, and you're like, man, oh yeah, I did something wrong, right? Like, how do I get these examples? Again, a little bit context awareness. I can do a little Jinja in here. I can zoom into the examples, right? So I'm basically templating that YAML doc, and I can zoom in. So I'm right at the examples. You're like, man, I don't want to cut and paste this, but I really want to take advantage of it. I can do a : open, and it'll open it as a new text document in VS Code for me. So failed task to the doc, to the examples, all the way to VS Code, new doc. Basically, I got a playbook over there on the left-hand side. I can run that. I can jump back. Let's close this guy out. Escape key takes you back. So that's playbook running. We can go, let's go to look at a couple other things. We know it has execution environment support, so I can do, again, : images at the bottom. You can do this from the command line as well. You can do ansible-navigator images. This will bring up a list of the execution environments that I have installed locally, so each one of these represents a container. You'll see some of them are EEs and some of them aren't, but the one I'm using here is number 4. I can bring up, I can basically do introspection of this container, so I can get information about the image, which is nothing more than a podman info command or docker info. General information, Ansible version, Python packages is the one I actually want to show you. Operating system packages, everything is just a roll-up. When I hit 3 here, what's actually happening is we're volume mounting a Python script into the container, running it. It's interrogating all of the information that we can harvest from inside the container, dumps it to JSON, sends it out, Navigator picks it up, and it does take a minute. And what this is going to show me is, there it is, every Python package installed within that execution environment. I can dig into these. Let's look at ansible-lint as an example. That's not a good example. Let's look at this one, Ansible core. We track required by and requires. So if I see a package in my execution environment and I'm not sure exactly why it's there, I can actually dig in and figure out what it was required by. Or if I get a version that I wasn't expecting, I can track it back through here. You can filter lists with ansible-navigator, right? So we were looking at, I could just : F filter on lint, and I'll get anything that has lint in the line. It's not a great filtering engine, but it's quick if you have a whole list of stuff and you just want to jump around. So that's image support. We pack system packages as well. Same kind of stuff there. Descriptions of all your system packages. What are you doing up here, Tim? You're making me nervous. Are you racing me?
If we skip the future stuff, everyone's going to be a little mad at us.
All right, hold on. Last one I'll show you. Last one I'll show you is collection support. This will actually catalog collections inside the container as well as anything I have locally. You can dig into these. It'll show you a list of all of the plugins for each of these. You can dig into all of the documentation as well. Same thing, I can open the documentation, sit over to VS Code, and new document locally. I'm done. You want to take over?
Yep.
Okay.
I'll be quick. Don't sit down. Okay, so that was our demos. Thanks, Brad. Yeah, we could easily have a whole session on Navigator if you can't tell just what Brad's going through. And there is a separate workshop for Navigator out there, and we're going to be working on improving that and doing more. But what I want to talk about a little bit is where we're heading in the next year or two with creator tools and give you some sense of how we look at things and what we're trying to do. This is a conceptual diagram that I created of how everything's going to fit together. One of the things we've identified is that there are content creators of all sorts. You're not just a Python program, module programmer. It's people doing, they're doing playbooks and roles, and they're doing docs, and there are people that are seasoned developers, and there are people that aren't developers at all that should be able to participate and create Ansible content and create their automation. So we've broken down some personas that you see on the left that have different ways that they will want to work with all the functionality we see on the right. And we kind of grouped them as stuff in testing and content creation, then there's some miscellaneous. And the way that each of these personas will work with this tooling are through these different interfaces that fit more of the way that they work. At least that's the intent in it. So there's still, of course, CLI, there's of course Navigator around, and there's also the VSCode extension, but we're also looking at how to do CI/CD better, easier, so that we can really get comprehensive testing done quickly. And also we're looking at, for new people, how do we help guide them through getting to develop their first stuff? You know, we want to think, we're looking in with doing user experience research to, you know, someone who doesn't know Ansible, how can we help them move on instead of throwing a whole bunch of developer tools at them they've probably never used before and saying, here's how you use Ansible. You know, so that's something coming down the line we're thinking about trying to work on. A couple new things we have to make people aware of. Ansible Molecule is I think a lot of people are using any Molecule users here? Yeah, this is another community success story that one of our community members had created Molecule some time ago. We adopted it, and it's just sat in community support for a number of years. We are now looking to change that. With the release of what we're calling Molecule 6, we're starting it down the path of being a supported part of the Ansible platform. It hasn't reached that status before, but this is the beginning steps. In order to do that, though, when went over it with Brad and team, is that there were things about Molecule that were going to be hard for Red Hat to support and maintain, and that we wanted to really focus what Molecule does and what it is. And that is to make it more of a test runner than a general purpose infrastructure testing tool like it has been. And that meant doing some breaking changes. So we listed some here. These slides will be, I've already turned them into the event managers. It'll be on the entry to this. But if you go up to the Molecule repo and GitHub, you'll see tickets for those 4. We're looking for feedback. But these are the things we believe that we need to do. The one is that the delegated driver only. I think that's a pretty significant one. The existing drivers will still work and are out there, but the one that we will maintain and work on and support is delegated. And the reason being, we thought it was a little odd that in order to provision and deprovision your testing environment, you had to write Python code and something called a driver. It's like, well, that's what Ansible does. So what delegated does is just lets you call Ansible playbook and have a playbook that creates your testing environment and then at the end tear it down. So we're really pushing everyone to use native Ansible to do that provisioning, deprovisioning that right now are these Python drivers. Some of the other ones, we don't have time to go over all of them, but we're looking for feedback on it. If there's something that you have a concern about or think we could do better or that we forgot that we should really consider, love to hear it. So this is going to be out as a developer preview sometime in the 3rd quarter, sometime during the summer after we ship version 2.4. And our team has a moment to catch their breath, but that will be out soon. And then one other thing I want to talk about is we're putting a lot of emphasis in, and Molecule comes into this, is a testing framework. And the idea of creating a standards-based way, a comprehensive way of doing testing across all your Ansible content. It's going to provide an alternative to Ansible tests. Ansible test was the tool created to test Ansible core. And then when collections came about, we kind of threw it into that fray and said, this is the tool you should use for doing your unit testing and sanity testing of your collections. But then it had a bit of a split personality. It's trying to serve what the core team was doing and also trying to serve what the collection team is doing. We want to create an alternative that is specifically written for collection developers doing modules, plugins of that sort. So the core components of this test framework, I don't know what the exact name will be, ansible-lint molecule, which we've seen. We've also, the team's created drivers for PyTest and tox. Those of you that are Python developers might be familiar with those, that they're just common Python tools that have huge communities behind them for doing it. We're just creating plugins that allow you to use those same frameworks to do your Ansible testing. And again, we're doing this to get it on the road to being a supported part of AAP. So there'll be best practices, documentation, all that stuff if you're a subscriber. And with that, back to Brad for more demos of some of this new cool stuff.
Tell me what time it is, Tim.
We have 10 minutes for your demo and Q&A.
Combined?
Combined.
Man,
Yes.
I told you I was going to carry on.
Yes?
Tim asked earlier who is aware of collections. I actually have a narrower question. Who has authored a collection? Oh, good. Huh? Internal. Is it plugins in it or just Ansible content YAML files? Little both? Yeah. Okay. Who's tested a collection? Hopefully the same hands come up. Oh, see, that's very telling. Okay. Anybody familiar with tox, PyTest? A little bit. You don't actually need to know anything about them. PyTest is nothing more than kind of the de facto tool for testing Python code. Collection unit tests are written in Python, so it's a natural tool to use there. Tox users, anybody know what tox is? Less people. Tox is nothing more than a tool that will build virtual environments for you on the fly, given a matrix of things to build for. So let me show you how this works. So you develop a collection and you want to test it. You need to test you run your unit sanity and integration tests, but you have to run it across Ansible 2.9. If you want certified content, you got to run it across 2.12, 2.13, 2.14, 2.15. If you're really aggressive, you're going to run it across milestone, and you want to use the Ansible devel branch. Well, that's a lot to take care of, right? And then you need to test it across Python 3.8, 3.9, 3.10, and 3.11. 3.12 is coming out next year, so you better be testing against that now, because otherwise you're going to have breaking changes. That full matrix looks like this. So every supported Ansible Python version, every supported Python version out there, every currently supported Ansible version for unit, sanity, and integration, you're like, man, that's a lot to do. What Toxus allows us to do, what a Tox plugin allows us to do is we actually maintain this list so you don't have to. So if you install this Tox Ansible plugin, you run that Tox command, you'll actually get this list for you.
Brad, can you bump up the size of your text? People in the back are squinting.
We'll just move up front. Better?
Better? Okay, there we go.
Yeah,
all right,
see.
thank you.
Put your glasses on, Tim.
I'm right here. I'm looking in the back.
This is one of the things I'm most excited about because the teams I work with maintain and manage a ton of collections, and this is the matrix of things that you have to really test for if you want to get your content certified or validated by Red Hat.
Yeah.
Latest release of our VSCode extension, which is the preview, now supports Tox. So I'm in VSCode, I'm looking at the Ansible SCM repo. I've got this full list of things here. If I have the Python interpreters installed, this is as easy as basically click and run. So I can now locally, as long as I have the Python interpreter, I can locally run any combination of any Python version, Ansible core version. What Tox is actually doing, and you can kind of see the mess that's going on in the background, builds a virtual environment using the Python interpreter, installs the Ansible core version that I need installed, copies the collection into that virtual environment, installs the collection into that virtual environment, installs the collection dependencies. And it does that every time. The reason that's important is because as you're developing a collection, you need to make sure that every time you run tests, you've got a fresh copy of the code. And if you've really gotten into this, just copying the files of the collection over doesn't give you the same thing as I actually packaged the collection and installed it, because you won't get the dependencies. And if you run it on Monday and you run it on Friday, what you want is the latest version of the dependencies unless you pinned them. Tox does this every time, so if you're running it locally. So I absolutely love this. The other thing I'll show you real quick is, Tim mentioned the PyTest Ansible plugin. If you've written unit tests for a collection, you know that you can't just run PyTest on your unit tests because Ansible doesn't know that the thing you're testing against is a collection. What the PyTest Ansible plugin does, it actually builds a collection tree inside your repo of your collection and soft links all of the collection files into that collection tree, injects the collection path into Ansible core, into the collection loader. The reason that's important is because now Microsoft, via the Microsoft Python extension supports PyTest really well. I can actually see my individual unit and integration tests here, and I can run them. And I won't show this, but I could actually run a debug on them as well. So now from inside VS Code, if I've written unit tests for the plugins, I can put a breakpoint in the test itself and actually get all the return values that the plugin instantiation is running. Did it work? Oh, that's cool. Anyway. I never count on these things working, right? Because there's a whole lot going on in the background. And the last thing I will bring attention to, I showed you the tox command. You can run these, I'm not gonna run this, but you can actually run any one of these environments just from the command line as well. So you can pick one and run it. Same with PyTest, I could just run PyTest from the command line. So if something fails and I wanna try it. Yeah. But what I wanna show you here is, if I do a minus Ansible, if I remember what this is. Okay, I'll put the command back up there. -- Ansible invokes the tox Ansible plugin. G8 matrix generates a JSON matrix of all of the factors that you can actually use in a GitHub action. So where this comes into play now is, we'll jump up to the Ansible SCM collection real quick, if I can figure out how to do this. Oh, sorry, Tim.
That's all right. No secrets on that one.
Yeah, I'm just gonna kill your stuff.
All right.
Let's see if I can do this quickly. Pull request. Oh, there's an open one here. It didn't pass, but that's fine. Oh, the checks didn't run. Hold on. We'll look at a closed one. Hopefully all the closed one passed their test, right? Look, they look like they did. So here is that same test matrix. Basically, the way this works is the GitHub action first invokes tox with the -- Ansible flag, collects the JSON output, injects it to the second part of the GitHub action, and that builds the matrix, and the GitHub action is actually running tox. The GitHub action for this is only 50 lines long. And you're getting the exact same outcome that you get if you run it locally, because tox is doing all the virtual environment builds. So you don't have to do manual requirements install in your GitHub action anymore. Tox is actually running these things for you. So this is really cool, right? You can run it from the command line like if you're used to, run your tests. You can run it in VS Code with the UI and the test tree. That's passing. Run it up in your CI, you get the exact same result. You have a failure here, you want to test, you're right back to the command line. You can source your tox environment. Tox keeps all the virtual environments around until the next time you run it. So you can actually source that virtual environment, and you're basically sitting inside a virtual environment that has Python 3.8 and Ansible 2.9 installed in it. You can run PyTest in there and figure out what the heck happened. So that's always our goal, right? CLI, build it into VS Code, make sure it works on CI/CD, and make sure you get the exact same thing all the way through.
Yep.
You want to take over?
Yes, we will wrap it up into some quick Q&A. I just wanted to, one thing I just wanted to add, because I forgot to put it in the slides. There were two other PyTest plugins out there. There's one that's Ansible Unit. That one's already been merged into the PyAnsible. The idea is we're just going to have one plugin. There is a PyTest molecule out there that's the work is happening.
Yep. So our goal is,
Okay.
there were 4 different PyTest plugins that I was aware of. Those are all getting combined into the PyTest Ansible plugin.
Yeah.
Anything tox related is going to tox. So one of the things we're going to add to tox probably in the next couple of months is EDA support for tox as well.
Right. Yeah, so it's still a work in progress, which is why it's in the future section of this presentation. I mean, it's out there, you can use it now, it's just be aware that it's not feature complete. So we have like 1 minute or 2. If anyone has any questions, yes, you got your hand up first.
Using the VSCode extension with Lightspeed, is my code sent to a Red Hat server to run it through the model, or do I get the local model?
It is sent.
Okay.
Yeah, there's an upstream service. And it is opt-in as well. So it is, even if you have the extension installed, you have to opt into Lightspeed. So it's kind of flipped from what you're used to.
Will there be an option to get a local model? I know this from an extension called Tab9. They offer a local copy because I'm not allowed to send company copies.
Yep, sure.
To a
Yeah, that would be a question for the Lightspeed team, because that's all the back end
We can
stuff.
find out.
Yeah.
Is Ganesh, I didn't see Ganesh in here.
Yeah.
Ping me afterwards. If Ganesh is out there someplace, we can ask him
Right.
if that's in the plans. All right.
So one more here, sorry.
So where do you see Ansible runner in this? Is it effectively superseded by Navigator?
No, Navigator actually uses Ansible Runner. So the direction we're going with Ansible Runner is to leave it as kind of a back-end API. Controller uses Ansible Runner. Navigator uses Runner. Runner's not going away. The only reason Runner would ever go away is if the functionality of Runner was put into Ansible core, and I can tell you that's not going to happen anytime soon. So Runner's here to stay. It's really becoming more of a Python API and less so of a command line tool. So.
All right, we have time for one more, and then Brad and I will be around here. I just have to warn everyone that I have something at 12:30. I'm going to have to bail out. Yes.
One of the biggest challenges that I've had, my team develops a lot of Windows content, unfortunately. Some of the modules we've written, testing those modules in an Ansible test has been a little finicky. We can't leverage, we want to leverage vCenter where we run our infrastructure for running those tests, and getting it to work in there has been a bit difficult, but we did make it work. This new replacement for Ansible test, I'm very curious to see how it approaches the creation of test infrastructure.
Okay, we'll probably leverage the capabilities of Molecule to do that. With Molecule running Ansible, we would make calls to vCenter to spin up infrastructure. That's kind of our goal is, right now if you use Molecule today, when the first time you use Molecule, you're like, I don't know anything about Molecule. I think I'm pretty good at Ansible, but this Molecule thing, I don't get it. We want Molecule to feel and look like Ansible, so it's not so startling to use it, and we want Ansible to do the heavy lifting for Molecule. The one thing Molecule does really well is kind of test execution. Right? Molecule is so good at that. Mm-hmm. The fact that there was a Podman driver in there, Ansible has its own Podman support. So that's kind of how we're trying to figure it out. Like, let Molecule be the test runner. We also want to displace, and don't quote me on this, we want to displace Ansible test integration with Molecule as well. So Molecule really becomes the de facto tool for running integration tests, which makes a lot more sense, right? Because if you're running an integration test within your collection, you need infrastructure to do that. Molecule can do that natively. So.
Windows modules are a little finicky. Like, we have to create a main controller to run tests against some of our...
Yep, but we should, if you can do it with Ansible Playbook, you should be able to do it with Molecule.
Right. And
That's the solution we came up with.
Okay,
So
perfect.
We created a delegated driver.
Excellent.
To create VMware instances.
right,
Cool.
and that's why we're going the direction of only supporting the delegated driver and suggesting everyone use playbooks through the developer or the delegated driver, so that you just are using Ansible to provision all this stuff that you're talking about.
We use those playbooks for those drivers in the workflow for Ansible tests. We kind of wrap it
Excellent,
around
perfect.
Right.
as well.
Yep.
Okay, so, okay, everyone, our time is up here, but like I said, Brad and I will
Thank
be up
you.
here for a little while. So thank you for coming. Oh, and fill out your surveys. They want me. I'm contractually obligated to tell you that. So
And-
please.
I'm Brad, he's Tim.
Right, you like to talk, it's Tim. If you didn't, it's Brad.